That's one small step for man.
AI rebels face.
Giant leap for mankind.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the AI Rebels podcast. As always, I'm your co-host, Jacob.
And I am your other co-host, Spencer. Today we are here with Bhaskar Sunkar. Am I saying your last name correctly?
That is right. Spencer.
Awesome.
Yeah.
He is the founder and CEO of Bicycle AI. Bhaskar, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us how you got into AI, and then we'll lead into Bicycle AI and talking about what you guys do over there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the founder CEO at Bicycle AI. We'll talk more about Bicycle, but think of Bicycle as like an always-on analyst for the business side. Really looking at business signals and really taking them to action. So that's the high level. My background before Bicycle, I was one of the founders and the CTO at AppDynamics, which was a application performance monitoring company. This was almost about a 10-year ride. Before that, I was at the company called Wiley, which was also in application performance monitoring. That's how I got into the field. And before Wiley, I was at this startup out of India called Pramati, which was basically like application middleware. So think of it as back in the WebLogic and the WebSphere days, if you remember those days, in terms of the web servers, app servers, it was just one of them. So enterprise infrastructure, plumbing, and all of that. So what I did was really use my infrastructure middleware background and then really applied it to kind of monitoring in terms of how applications work. What's the plumbing? How do you sort of like look at distributed transactions? How do you like trace them across app servers? So that was pretty handy. So that's quick background about myself.
Yeah, you have a deep background. That's exciting. I think we see an interesting range in this field where there are those like yourself where you've kind of been LLMs are relatively new, but like the AI, machine learning, the app dynamics, that whole field, you've been involved for a long time. So I think it'll be interesting to get your take on the developments.
No, I missed out on the AI part. So I would say that, at AppD, one of the things we did was, especially what we did with baselining and understanding system behavior and things like that, that's using like a bunch of machine learning, but we kind of applied in a way where it looks at patterns that tie back to the business. Some of the things that we innovated with, but that's actually where I would say I got started with it. And then once the whole revolution happened, there's a few areas where it just made so much sense to apply Bicycle. So one of the things with Bicycle is that we've been catching up. We've been sort of like really figuring out how to apply just the amazing sort of technology that's been coming out the last couple of years or so, whether it is the early on sort of knowledge work part or sort of just the agentic part on how that applies to analytics systems. But that's been fun. But I think started out probably with some of the machine learning stuff in Apple. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, that's awesome. Apti, is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Over time it became Apti. That's what you call it if you're in the know. If you're
in the know, exactly. And now
okay,
you know.
That's good. Now I'll sound like I know it.
Exactly.
Okay, so can you give us the big idea of Bicycle? Like, and maybe, if there is a story that you have of coming to the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say, coming back to the definition, Bicycle is an always-on analyst for the business side. And what we do is we plug into operational data. So think of orders, payments, inventory, etc. And we're continuously looking for meaningful changes. So drifts in KPIs and, things like that. So you could say, hey, my revenue, again, when you think about KPIs, there's multiple of them which are business. So you could have revenue, you could have other things like conversion, fulfillment, and things like that. So when something moves, a KPI drifts, we don't just alert, we don't just detect it, but we localize the slice. So for example, is it happening in a particular sort of, for a particular iOS version? Is it happening for a particular payment service provider? Is it happening for a particular merchant? So it could be a localized business slice. It could be a localized, technical slice. And once we localize, we surface likely drivers. A lot of times these are hypotheses. And we also quantify impact. We link back with the KPIs, and the KPIs, think of them as hierarchical. So we quantify that. And then we push a decision-ready sort of like set of options into a workflow. So that could be Slack, that could be sort of like in the UI,
Oh, wow.
etc. Yeah. And so to summarize, I think one of the ways we work with data is obviously looking at dashboards, etc. And so what we do is Bicycle is running like a constant agent loop. So it sits on top of business data. And basically the real-time control loop is detect, explain, act, and learn, right? So it actually, you know, you can almost think of it as a deal: detect, explain,
Yeah.
act, and learn. So,
Right.
but the point is that detection is based off of KPI drifts or anything that's sort of linked to the semantic model. That's the definition. And then explain is looking at likely causes, likely drivers. Those could be, business in nature. So is it an inventory thing? Is it like a, pricing thing? Or it could be technical. Something happened in a release and you impacted like a particular slice, a particular sort of iOS version or something like that, a particular Chrome version. So that's the explain part. And then the act part is, here's a list of options. Depending on what it is, you could automate them or you could have a human in the loop. And then the learn part is basically, just learning continuously on what you detected, what you explained, what you acted on, or what you suggested. Was that good, not good, and how do you sort of like learn from it?
So I'm curious. So app observability is a very, very deep and broad problem space, and you've had a lot of time in the space. I'm really curious, from your perspective, what about the problem space has fundamentally changed with the introduction of AI, and what has remained the same? That's probably a broad question. So if you have one or two examples, that would be sufficient.
Absolutely. See, the way I look at my AppD journey and Bicycle right now is I think of AppD as technical signal to action, right? So latency, response time, error rate, and everything like that, right? It's pretty consistent, as in I'm measuring a service and, there's no schema associated with it. It's absolute, right? And you're kind of like looking at that and saying, hey, this is drifting. Let me figure out what's happening. Is it a code issue? Is it a query issue? Is it a network issue? You go through all of that analysis, right? When you come to Bicycle, though, I would think of that more as business signal to action, right? And business signals are much more nuanced because it's not like one absolute number. There's like a chain of KPIs. Like you could look at traffic. You could look at conversion. You could look at approvals. You could look at fulfillment. You could look at like, revenue, refunds, all of those. It's a set of like KPIs. And so that is where you're like, hey, this is business signal to action. The definition of a business signal sometimes also is not straightforward. The definition of a KPI, it's based off of a semantic model.
Right.
So all of that part is also super important. So does that make sense? I think in terms of the differences between those words. Yeah.
I like that you use the word schema, because I think that's an important word for a lot of people to start learning, right?
Correct.
Understanding at a broad level how to construct, high level constructs of ideas.
So what was what's the gap? Because obviously I think there are a lot of similar companies. What is it that makes Bicycle unique compared to other similar agentic approaches to data analysis and surfacing insights, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at it, a lot of it basically is where the agentic stuff is, asking a question and the question translated, so natural language question, and then translation of that into, hey, drill down into the data, try to come up with like sort of the right answer, right? One of the differences that we have is, number one, we believe in the proactive part of it versus the reactive part of it, where, you're chatting with the system. And the system's basically understanding a lot of your questions and the deeper data model. So think of it as when you do the chatbot thing, or when you do the chat thing, the system functions as a data analyst, right? You basically ask questions in natural language. It translates it, understands the schema, and then gives you the answer. we think of like Bicycle as a business analyst layer on top of it, where it's not relying on you to ask the question, but like it knows this is the domain,
I see.
this is the company. You could feed more knowledge to it, and it's using that knowledge to set up a whole bunch of patterns that you automatically, are using or basically sort of like asking. And I think for us, I think really having like an agent where it's owning a goal, which is the KPI is the goal, or the quantification of that as a goal, watching it continuously and deciding next steps. That's the part that is key, because otherwise, what you're really doing is like putting the onus on the user to say, you ask the right question, you get the right answers, versus a more proactive, domain-specific agent. So we actually specialize in transactional businesses. So we focus on travel, retail, and payments. And payments, you can think of it as an adjacency to both travel and retail, as almost a subset of it. But that's where we focus on. We also did that because the sense of urgency and translation of raw data to insights is much higher for those verticals. But we give you like a very specific sort of domain model. It's built as a vertical solution where the business analyst in Bicycle is telling you what to look for, setting up all those patterns, and automating a whole bunch of that before you have to do it. It obviously works on top of your stack, so it's pretty straightforward to kind of do that. But then also the other unique thing that we have is we are looking at both the business dimensions and the technical dimensions in the cause analysis, right? So a lot of similar solutions don't have the deeper cause analysis. And for us, both the business dimensions and the technical dimensions, and that's actually where the word Bicycle comes from. We look at those as the two wheels of the business, and Bicycle's kind of driving both of them together as think of it as a data drivetrain. But that's the other unique part, where it's like one unified map which connects both the dimensions. So just to summarize, both the technical and business dimensions, and then just custom built for a particular vertical, and acting as a business analyst for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm actually in the travel vertical. Cool. In my day job, I run a small travel startup. As you were talking about it, I was not at all surprised to hear you mention that travel was one of the verticals that you were targeting. On that note, is this something where you can feed to it not only business logic, but like so for example, in travel, price signals are constantly changing, right? Prices are incredibly dynamic, even minute to minute. Is that something where you can set up a watcher and say, hey, watch price signals in this city and figure out why people are not booking on these dates?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, like I'll tell you like one of the super interesting use cases we do with a large travel provider. As you said, obviously search prices, they're very volatile, very sort of like dynamic. So what we do for this large travel startup, large travel company, is that all search results go through Bicycle, and we do this now for about 50,000 routes. And the route is basically San Francisco, New York, let's say, just to simplify it, right? And as all search results go through, what we are looking for is that based on the date. So let's just say you're searching for the July 4th, weekend or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So we would have a baseline of what's a good price, what's a bad price, what's a really good price. And if someone searched for it, because the prices are coming from like a different backend, right? Price line's not dividing, or like the particular company is not really determining the prices. When we know that there is an attractive price, we then use automation to push that price to Instagram, right? Or push that price to a page where someone says, oh, this is a great price, right? And what you've built is, it's almost like a data application, which is using the volatility of the prices and looking at interesting prices and pushing that, but using the AI, using the machine learning to kind of do that. And so that's what we enabled. So that's a really cool use case with some of what you just brought up.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's those are such simple but transformational use cases. People really underestimate how hard it is to get inventory in front of people's eyes when it matters. Like
totally.
that is a shockingly
Totally.
undersolved problem in the travel space, I've realized.
It's so interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll be honest, I haven't thought about that much. Yeah. As you think about it, that's very, there's a lot of moving pieces there, I'm sure.
I could give you another travel use case, just when, we're on travel, right? Like, so this is basically like a opportunity kind of a use case where it's like, hey, your conversion or your click-through rate will improve because you're feeding attractive prices, whether on Instagram or whether on pages. The other one there is that one of the other common factors in travel is suppliers. Like a supplier is giving you a price. And then when you book, this is what happens on Orbitz, Priceline, etc. When you book, like it takes some time for the ticket to come back to you because they process it with the supplier. So oftentimes what happens is that there's issues with the supplier processing. There might be errors with it. And so what we are doing is, and that's a loss of revenue because your ticket's not booked and you're not going to come back and book it again. Right. And so we are looking for very, very specific errors with respect to a particular supplier with a particular city code. And we run a webhook to basically say, hey, this supplier is taken out of commission for some time. And then the feedback loop basically gets them in. So this is more of a revenue leaking type of a use case that the agent kind of really acts on.
That's an incredible one because that's a really long tail. Absolutely. Conversion.
And there's so many of them, right? Like if you have like 1,000 suppliers or whatever, you can't sort of like start looking at multiple widgets, looking at like their processing error rate and all of that. I mean, the agent has to look for it.
Yeah. No, that's an incredible one.
So how much training do you have to do for the agent for each company, for example? Or do you kind of have out of the box, it's fairly ready to go? Or is it more of a bespoke custom approach?
No, great question. A lot of it is picked up when we deploy, because what happens is we set up the stream. Like let's say you're on top of a warehouse and you're picking up big booking, search, and all of those signals. But what we also do is we catch up historically for, let's say, we're picking up 2 years worth of data, right? So we pick that up, and then we construct sort of our a sense of like a baseline or whatever from the 2 years of data that we've already ingested. So there's something already in the system, and over time it learns it. But one of the most important things is in terms of the baselines, in terms of like basically the seasonality and everything else we learn, that's all classic machine learning, right? So we don't do LLMs do the math, right? Because that's not what they're suited for. And so, again, there's the business analyst, there's the data analyst. The LLM is the business analyst, the machine learning is the data analyst. And the AI orchestrates it because it understands the business, but the data analyst basically is the only one that does the math, and it catches up historically to your point, to your question on just being useful from day one.
That's so interesting. It's fascinating to see everybody's slightly different approaches to
choices.
And how each one has their own positives and negatives, and I don't know. This whole space is fascinating because there's such diversity. I'm curious because it sounds like a lot of what Bicycle is aiming for, and this can be applied, I think, large scale to lots of AI tools and other founders, where what Bicycle is engineered to aim for is a KPI, right? To help the business achieve their KPIs.
Correct.
What happens if the KPIs are bad? What if they're not good APIs? Do you also kind of have to coach some of these companies to say like, hey, that's not going to work. That's not going to get you what you're looking for. What do you have to do?
No, definitely. I think one of the things we do is, and typically KPIs is a bunch of work that the companies have already done. They have them in the systems already, and we do as much as we can to import those definitions, work with them, things like that, right? What the LLM helps with, where if it's not like a sound KPI layer, is we use some of the models in using some of the domain language, using some of the domain models to come up with our calculations, and we do a little bit of a cross check, and verification. But honestly, that is an area where if we don't have an agreed upon model, because sometimes it's not even about whether that's accurate or not. It's whatever the business wants to measure it as, right? Like, are you doing net? Are you doing gross? Like, it really depends on you on what are you really anchoring your sort of like, core operations on. And so that's definitely one of the reasons, one of the areas where, I think we have to have a solid definition. Otherwise, it's a point of failure. And we go based on, we definitely are not solving cleanliness of either data or the KPIs or things like that. So we definitely assume that what we could do is point out that a pipeline is broken, point out that the calculation is wrong, and say, hey, we can't really act on it. But we're kind of acting on that layer up, basically.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so something that I have been obsessed with about AI agents for a long time is the idea of how do you get people to trust them in an enterprise environment, right?
Yeah.
From day one, that's always been to me what's going to slow their rollout. How have you gotten executives and how have you gotten people at businesses to trust the the always on independent autonomous agent approach?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. That's one of the biggest things to solve right now. And, there's a bunch of ways, right? Like, number one, I think when you think about sort of starting to run on top of the data, a lot of it is doing sort of like running like a shadow mode. So we do a shadow mode, we do a back test. So a very, very simple example is, hey, you have a bunch of data and, we are telling you, hey, this is what the alerts would be like. This is what we would come up with for that data. And also because we catch up with historical data, that basically really helps, right? So it's something like that where we're kind of saying we can simulate it, we can back test it. And so people are like, oh, that's too noisy or that's not noisy enough. And sometimes what will happen is they'll set up the right suppression rules. They're like, oh, you're alerting even when the revenue at risk is pretty low. So let me set up a suppression rule saying, don't do this unless the revenue at risk is more than like, $10,000 or something like that, right? So there's a little bit of that part where we are sort of like doing the back test and all of that part, for the trust. And then the some of the other pieces are, especially when we do automation, I think the ground rules for automation is that it has to be reversible and it has to have like a smaller blast radius for us to say, hey, this is when we'll do it. Everything else, I think, needs a human in the loop, right? And that's way more comfortable because, again, if it's not reversible, and also it is more of a strategic decision versus it's a very tactical decision. Like shifting like a payment service provider is very different from saying, like, why don't you go and like change, the price, across the site, right? Like, and that needs like somebody to look at it because the point is like someone has to be accountable. So you can't basically say, look, AI did it and I can't help it. So that's where, and just having that conversation on, because, it's great to pitch saying that, hey, we'll take action. We're the AI agent that's going to do X, Y, Z. But I think approaching it more logically on, hey, this is what we do. This is the capability. And also causality is always, tricky where it's like, and we say, look, these are hypotheses, especially depending on looking at multiple systems to sort of like come up with cause analysis versus saying, hey, this is 100% deterministic. Like what's deterministic is the localization, right? Like the specific slice, the specific merchant, the specific city, the specific supplier. That's more deterministic because the answer is coming from data. But the cause of it a lot of times is hypothesis. So I think it's a combination of like doing sort of data-driven things like backtest, etc., but also sort of having the right conversation on like, what's good, what's not, or where you should introduce a little bit of like backstops, etc.
Yeah, I like that.
I think it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it from this perspective before, but it almost turned what you said about the human in the loop and accountability. I think
absolutely.
It almost turned that idea on its head where I've always thought the consumers are the ones who will always want a human in the loop, right? To have someone have eyes on decisions.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's all, because it's for you and for many other AI, especially agents where they're doing this analysis and prompting decisions. It's also the provider. Like Bicycle wants a human in the loop to reduce their, if they don't want a decision to be made and performed, that then falls on them. Which is an interesting perspective, because in my mind it was always, let's help the consumers trust it more and have a human in the loop. But it's also accountability.
I think one of the things one of the ways to think about it is that automation or trust, I feel like it's a little bit of a ladder. It's a step, it's a step, it's a step. It's not like a yes, no, but have you gained enough trust to do the next step? Have you gained enough trust to do the next step? And the more the blast radius is, the more irreversible it is. I feel like you have to sort of like have baby steps in getting there and have the right guardrails, because otherwise I think it's kind of an accountability thing, and only humans are accountable, and someone has to own the action. And so if you don't do that well, especially with revenue related decisions, if you made a decision, if you made a decision which can impact like, a certain amount of revenue versus like bringing in like a big shift like that's where you have to be careful, I feel.
So how do you handle those guardrails? Is that like do you just hook into your customer's authorization and you say, hey, this is agent, agent XYZ, he has the permissions level of a marketing analyst in your organization? Or is this something that you have to set up on your side for each customer?
Yeah, I think it's actually multiple things, right? So sometimes it can start with like, hey, I'm gonna pick a lane where you can have more autonomy, right? Like I was mentioning, like payment provider, failover and things like that. But don't do that for changing policies. Could be cancellation, could be pricing and things like that. So that's sort of like the advice on what do you want to apply this on, and we kind of recommend that. But it's also sort of like doing some throttling. Especially when, again, it's something critical, you can introduce some sort of suppression or throttling on top of it. And you can do it with a prompt, but I think the point is you're giving them more ways of, doing that, and doing some level of like, failovers and, things like that, right? Where I think, again, you're choosing a lane, but you're giving them the power to decide on what is the gravity of this decision and like how much blast radius basically does it have. But I think if I were to pick one thing, it would be like, let's start with small experiments and sort of like expand, basically how it works. And over time, you can have more and more autonomy and more trust. But there are some decisions that you always want basically like a human in the loop.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. So, okay, I'm just curious, Bhaskar, from your perspective, AI obviously, not AI, let me back up. AI has been around a long time. Machine learning has been around a long time. LLMs are new, and this recent influx in AI usage is new. And you've seen, the early SaaS companies, things of that nature. How would you say this compares to the SaaS hype cycle, the other similar hype cycles? Do you think this is similar, or is this different in any way?
No, I think there is definitely, similarity, right? Because it's a huge unlock what sort of the technology gives you, and there's a lot of hype. Though, in fact, I would say that this cycle has, way more signal. There's a lot more signal, genuinely, than cloud had, let's say, when we were starting out in 08. But the noise to signal ratio is much higher,
Interesting.
And it's because the on-ramp, like how quickly can you build an AI demo, AI sort of like solution is much shorter, much quicker. Like you can build an AI product and ship it in a week, right? And the barrier to say you're AI powered is very, very minimal. You can come up with that really, really quickly. So the market is basically flooded with a bunch of stuff that really doesn't work. And it's, along with stuff that actually works, right? Like, and they are looking very identical when you look at it. And so I would say AI easier prototyping, and SaaS made sort of provisioning, etc., easier. But but I think when it became real, the operationalization of it, like the trust associated with it, like the security associated with it, all the boring stuff, right? Like that is the going into production part. Like that part is tougher, I feel, in with the AI. But the similarity is how much the hype is, and in fact, like I was saying, I think there's just a lot more signal, right now. But but honestly, the boring stuff like governance, are you reliable? Like, what's the distribution? All of that eventually, I think will win out, and it cannot just be like how quickly can you prototype and show something.
Yeah. I feel like we're already seeing that. A little bit of that plateau. It's interesting because this podcast, obviously, we talk to guests of all types, company sizes, stage, all over the map.
Yeah.
And it's been what, a little over 2 years, Spencer, something like that.
Yeah.
Which
about that.
in AI terms is eons.
An eternity.
Basically. Every week there's so much happening. Absolutely.
It's crazy.
And it's crazy to see even people we've had on the show some of them have now pivoted 3 times. We just had on Grigory from Poland, who's completely pivoted to now trying to develop humanoid robotics, where he was not even in that field before. And it's just this, his product I think was great, but I think you're right that the barrier to entry is so low because of AI, which I love. I love that it's now possible for people, but it does force you. It forces you to have to sift through more. If you're looking for a solution, there's going to be
the ability to
dozens.
say no, we are not going to build that has never been more powerful. With code, trending to 0, it's so easy to just slop features in. I feel like there's a lot of companies falling for that right now. I won't say names. I'll keep those to myself. But later, if they go badly, then I'll talk about how the whole time I knew it was going to happen.
Totally.
I like flop features. Because it really is. I was just having a chat with a coworker who working with him on building just a simple, essentially a accounts receivable follow-up solution. Using chat like Codex. So it's nothing crazy, but he was able to spin up an MVP in like 2 hours. And that would have he wouldn't have even been able to do that in the past. Like he's not a coder, he's not an engineer, he's a senior revenue accountant, it's like, but now he's able to do that, and it could save, it could save us $40,000 because we don't have to go pay for an annual subscription to another service. And we can make it exactly what we want. That being said, we've very quickly realized how easy it is to just keep building. And you're like, cool. Let's just keep going.
Absolutely.
And then you never actually ship anything, and you're just like, oh, we're still iterating. We're still iterating. And eventually you have
before
to
you actually start operating at scale, right? Like before you start operating, trusting it every day. So that's a little bit of a different ballgame. I think the boring stuff is important. And if that doesn't happen, then I feel like it doesn't cross the chasm.
Yeah. Which, it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out, because the trust is the big one. It's still, people still fall back on. I wish the introduction of AI had gone smoother, because everyone just keeps falling back to hallucination. Oh, those lawyers who used it to write fake cases, and it's like the same things that you hear over and over, and you're like, that's not really as much of an issue now, but it's Bhaskar, how do you see that changing for the public at large? Like, how do we educate the population?
And you mean generally in terms of like across the board in terms of AI, or basically,
like how do we increase trust in artificial intelligence, in the new models, things like that?
No, I think a lot of it is basically definitely what you apply that for, right? And also like not sort of overselling it, but really talking about like what's the thing. So if I talk about like, maybe with what we're doing, and I think in terms of that, right, I'm going to think about like what are the advantages that we really bring, and it's just like helping with decision latency, for example. So making analysis easier, where it's not 3 hours anymore, but it's like 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is. And that's a definite advantage. It's also like amplification of like when you're kind of making some judgment on a bunch of data, you're kind of amplifying that, because now it's also sort of like the hierarchy now. Everybody's senior, especially anybody can get access to it. And that's sort of like is another part of it. So pick the right things where, hey, this is the advantage, and don't oversell it. Talk about failure also. Talk about sort of like where it fails, where it's not safe, etc. Because that's just the reality of any operational system. It's not going to just like magically come up with the right results and work great all the time. So just sort of humanizing it a little bit, where it's like, look, I mean, there are points of failure. This is just not magic where everything is going to just like work automatically all the time. But just focus on, here's like the 2 or 3 big advantages that you want to anchor on, versus you thinking about this is like the panacea. I think that's a good start in terms of that.
Yeah.
And then also like, I think things like ownership, right? Like how do you sort of like, especially when there's a model, there's a semantic model, like we talked about KPIs, etc. If there's escalation, if there's sort of stuff like that, like who's responsible, who's accountable? It's just not going to be to start with this autonomous system that's just going to always do the right thing, because it is non-deterministic, right? Like you haven't coded in a workflow. You're asking the agent to do the right thing based on what it knows and the tools that it has access to. So really kind of set up those guardrails and things like that, and make it more real versus, hey, it's just going to be magic in the background.
Yeah.
I like that a lot, because I think that is something that I think people are starting to come around to that more and more. But for the last few years, most AI practitioners I've been very disappointed in, because and I've perhaps been guilty of this myself at points. If I have to be completely honest, it's really easy and really tempting to just be like, listen, guys, AI is amazing. It's gonna solve your life, without actually getting specific about it and explaining to people, here are the material benefits.
Correct.
And I don't think that there's any way that we get people on board, either on an individual level or on a social level, without explaining and being persuasive about those material benefits.
Exactly.
And to be persuasive about those material benefits, we have to provide them. We can't just hope that they happen.
Yeah.
No, it's
These
not.
are the
It's
3
good
material
engineering
benefits, basically. Exactly.
and good business practices, same as it's always been.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's again, we're coming to it. I feel like we've talked about this so much recently. I don't know why it keeps coming up. Probably because it's true. That's probably why. But like the business practices don't change. This is a tool. It's something to use.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice, Bhaskar, for those for just maybe listeners, not super non-technical, but they're maybe a business owner looking for reliable tools? Obviously there are so many, like you said, the signal to noise rate, like there's so much noise. How would you recommend someone finding the gems in all the noise?
No, I would say, I think, like Spencer was saying, focus on like the material benefits versus like what model are they using? Like, do they have like a fine-tuned model? Are they using the latest or whatever, right? Like, because, a lot of times, I think, I've seen a lot of founders talk about the tech they're using, the models they're using, versus the problem they're solving. Right? Like, so
I like that. Yeah.
Like Bicycle being like an always on analyst for the business data or for the business side is the identity of it. And AI is what really enables it to do an amazing job. Right. I think that's how you need to look at like whatever you're building, whatever you're shipping, versus saying, I'm using this model, I'm using that model. The OCR in that is great. So I'm now doing sort of like, so if you're doing more of the tech part, so I would advise folks to really focus on like what is the core value prop, what's the value they're solving, and then like really look at as they apply it, what does it depend on? Does it have a foundation? Does it have a semantic model? Does it have a definition that it works on top of? And that's what makes it more reliable. So it's almost like this, right? So I think context is more important than sort of compute and speed and everything else. If it can be structurally important for what you're doing, right? So Bicycle will be structurally important for revenue management or working with revenue, all the data that's associated with it. And when it's structurally important and it sits under a foundation where you're using your KPIs or data definitions or the semantics to manage all that, that's when it becomes more reliable. And then as you implement it, understand the if there's automation involved, understand the reversibility of it, understand the blast radius of it, and then find lanes to experiment and get people to have trust in the experimentation, and then go from there, right? Because it does take time, adoption. I think I was hearing this example recently on, like, imagine, obviously it's a more regulated industry with self-driving and everything, but imagine when self-driving was kind of ready for prime time, and then the percentage of Waymo rides still is very small, right? It takes time for the adoption curve to really kick in. So you have to be deliberate about it, and you have to, do some of the things I talked about, but also do things like, finding small lanes to experiment and to really prove out before you sort of like start boiling the ocean. And that's how I would kind of really approach it as a practitioner who's just bringing in tech. Basically, just don't be thinking about just the buzzwords and everything else that's basically going on. Does that make sense? Were you looking for something like that as an answer? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
No, I like that you keep bringing up reversibility, because I think it's a concept that a lot of engineers and adjacent to engineers are kind of familiar with and understand why it's important to business processes, but it hasn't necessarily mattered to business processes outside of engineering fields until now, where we have true fully automated business processes across a wide variety of fields. Whereas before, it's like, you get a cron job that processes a bunch of information, pushes it into a data lake. That's easily reversible by default.
By default,
Absolutely. And I'm curious, do you have any examples of how businesses have engineered reversibility, or kind of the pitfalls of not doing so?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And I think it also is very tightly linked to the whole blast radius thing on how important this decision is. Is it just a question of, changing like a, like a payment provider or like canceling a supplier, like I was giving you that example, versus like how broad it is, changing like an overall policy, or like, hey, we can apply these rules, change the fraud policy to now apply this. Because I mean, the agent might be suggesting that, right? Like, just based on finding a cause, it's like, hey, this is the natural sort of action. And if you've given it agency to really, do those broad things, then it becomes kind of really, really hard. So I would say, I think when you pick a lane saying, hey, let me look at these KPIs to sort of like really work with, pick some actions that are easy to start with, like the impact of them are not going to be like super far reaching. And then like bake in reversibility, as in, if I do this and we find out that this is sort of like the wrong sort of action that's taken, how quickly can you kind of reverse? In the beginning, like have some approvals in terms of, or not just approvals, but like when the actions happen, have humans basically rate them, like a little bit of reinforcement, etc. And so as long as the agent has a learning loop, right? And which is why I kind of said it's detect, explain, act, and learn. As long as you have something like that, and the learning loop is not just for this, but like, if we create like an AI report, if we create like a story, how should the formatting look like? What is my terminology?
Right.
What is that I typically use? All of those are also pretty important.
Yeah. It's it's interesting that you talk about that loop, because I think people take that for granted a lot, and the complexity that accompanies that learning loop for agents and everything that it takes to build that. And it's an incredible unlock with AI that we can do that we can have this learning
for
loop.
sure. Absolutely.
It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious, because you obviously you were at Apty, App Dynamics, for kind of the full ride. Like, you saw it from young to the exit.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I kind of have a question with two parts. One is, what did you learn from that experience that you're now applying in this AI company, Bicycle? And then what did you have to adapt and unlearn that doesn't apply anymore now that you're in the AI space?
Yeah. No, I think the learning part is probably a lot of it. I think having an opinionated product, because like I mentioned, technical signal to action and business signal to action. So there's a lot of parallels in how we're really kind of approaching that type of the story. And having an opinionated product on, hey, there is like there's like a core semantic layer. So if you think about the semantic layer in AppD, it was the business transaction. And the fact that a business transaction had a trace, which is an individual transaction that I'm tracing that has diagnostic data. So there's sort of like a model that we really worked with. And that model was the underpinning in every deployment, right? Like, we're not looking at like all sorts of different metrics, but we normalize the environment we're looking for to, here's a set of business transactions and let's work with that, right? So very similarly, I think what Bicycle does is it normalizes the loop, or sort of like the distance from raw data to action. So raw data basically is onboarded as a set of events. So events are transactions, like they can be orders, payments, etc. Right? And then on top of those, you'll have a set of dimensions. Set of dimensions are, like a merchant, like a city, like a product, like a payment provider, all of those business dimensions. And then you start creating KPIs on top of them. So you can say revenue by city, you can say, conversion rate, you can say approval rate, you can say decline rate, and you can slice them by any of those dimensions. So those are the KPIs that the business layer really, really tracks. And then when you drift, saying, hey, there's a spike, there's a drop, there's a forecast problem, then you start attaching causes to them, right? So the cause could be technical, the cause could be business, it could be inventory, it could be pricing, it could be whatever, right? And then eventually each cause can have an action. So, well, if it's inventory and it's out of stock, the action could be, you could order, right?
Yeah.
If it's technical and it was caused by a time issue, which is like when this release happened, you made a wrong change, and then that is basically what's causing the issue, you could roll it back, right? So if you think about it, the ontology of the whole model is from the beginning to the end. It's like a very well-defined structure, right? And that's what really gets the system going, versus it's a data problem. It's a business model problem. It's a modeling issue, versus it's a data issue where it's like, what queries am I going to fire on Snowflake and, and BigQuery to come up with these insights, right? Like, you have to model it, you have to liken it to the business. And that's what I learned from, I think, the modeling in AppD and the modeling here. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
sorry, go ahead, finish it.
No, go ahead. I'll answer the second part after. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Jake. I totally forgot you had a second question. I was reminded of my question
the second
from earlier.
Part was the unlearning part. The second part was the unlearning part, and I actually had mentioned that before. The unlearning part is that, the KPIs and the definitions and just the, the assumption of drift and uncertainty and the continuous evaluation, that is sort of new, right? Like, these are not like, hey, there's like the holy grail of monitoring is that, you take sort of transactions and you're like, this is response time, this is error rate, and this is performance. This is like, this is, load, right? Like those three, for example, become simple, and there's no schema or anything like that. You're just tracking those metrics, and it's just much more nuanced in the, in the business world.
Interesting.
All right. This reminded me of my question earlier that I forgot.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there, you mentioned, that Bicycle has more of a concept of schemas. Does Bicycle have a concept of sort of like a universal business schema, or is it more of each individual business has its own schema, and you track these, you have some sort of multi-tenant database system?
Yeah. So think of it as, it's actually what I just described, right? Like, so how does raw data go to events, goes to KPIs, goes to patterns or drifts in the KPIs to their respective causes and the respective actions. So
I see.
Think of that as a giant ontology that is generated for a company. It can be generated by some of the vertical specialization that we start doing in our systems, or you as a company can give us, here's my standard operating procedures, here's my screenshots, here's my Tableau screenshots, here's my KPI documents, here's my KPI catalog. So all of that constructs sort of like the overall data model.
Yeah.
And then we also set up like the pattern model, which is what to do when this drifts and what to do when that drifts. So that is the core underlying schema for every organization. And the fact that we focus on these three verticals means that we specialize in those and we create more of like the travel and the payment and sort of like retail schemas. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's an interesting business model to me. And I think that it's just, there's a lot of business models that are yet to be born, I think. And I think that Bicycle and similar products are kind of helping people circle around those and start to discover them where, I mean, I won't say too much with that because I'll start giving away, my own product plan. But Bhaskar, you and I might be having some offline conversations.
Oh, absolutely, man! I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that. Yeah, 100%.
Bhaskar, I just as we're starting to kind of reach the end, which always makes me sad. Do you have? It is always fun, and it's always fun also now that you're part of the AI Rebels family to see where you're at in 6 months. Like you said, that is so 100%. Much time in AI, and who knows where you'll be. But do you have? Obviously, like Bicycle has already reached a pretty solid level of success, and there are a lot of aspiring AI founders, engineers, all these people who are trying to make it in the AI space. What would you emphasize to them, some do's and don'ts as you're trying to build an AI company?
Yeah, I think it's sort of like linked with when we were talking about like how to get practitioners to think about it. And I would say approach it that way. Definitely don't think about the tech you're using, etc., but be passionate about solving a particular problem. And the AI is basically an enabler. But definitely look beyond the demo and the prototype, right? Because you could just fire that up really quickly. You could whip that up really quickly. How do you go beyond that? Start thinking about sort of like what are the failure modes? Where does that sort of like, and how do you get someone to start trusting that more, right? And then from a engineering or architecture point of view, just being very comfortable with like a non-deterministic kind of programming model, because programmers are just used to encoding every piece of instruction saying if then do that, right? Like that's the core model. And exactly. And so without that, like being very comfortable with building a system, which is so much of a shift, and kind of embracing that part, but do the boring stuff also, or at least plan for the boring stuff. And how do you operationalize it? How do you do the quality part? How do you do the evals? How do you do all of those? And they're as important as sort of anything. And I think do a lot more on design, right? Like on design, what it used to be and what it is now is very different, because design used to be like a good user interface, and it is basically right now designing the agent loop, right? That's when you're doing some work. What is your loop, right? Like what's your loop that is very productive, but just make sure you're doing everything else around it, all the boring stuff around it. And I think that's when you're starting to say, hey, this is like a product that I want mass adoption.
Yeah.
I want people to trust, not just like basically saying, hey, it's kind of unpredictable with whatever AI does.
Yeah.
I want to kind of reemphasize, do the boring stuff up front as much as possible, because the boring stuff is all the stuff that's really, really painful to load into your whatever app it is, months into your development.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And also I would emphasize that in that, like, to be successful, you still have to pay a price. It's not AI isn't this easy road. I think it amplifies your impact, it amplifies what you can do, but it's not easy. And I think people are starting to realize that, and that's why we're starting to see a lot of the people who wanted to ride the waves just naturally slough off. Like they're just kind of disappearing. Because it's like, oh wait, this is still hard. You can't just make it. You can't just do it.
Absolutely. And it's also like the maturity of the use cases that I think has to sort of like start going up, right? Because like a few years from now, if you're kind of saying, hey man, like my meeting summary was great, that's that's not where you want to be, right? If you're like basically I wrote an email faster or something like that, that's not, if it's not organically integrated into operations without adding risk and volatility, I feel like that's where it needs to get to, and that's 100%. A much tougher road than a bunch of like prototyping that's happening right now.
One more note on guardrails. One of our previous guests said this, and it's just stuck in my head ever since. That there's a quote from an F1 driver. I don't remember. I'm doing the whole like Michael Scott, Wayne Gretzky, like quoting one person quoting another right now. But the quote goes that like the people make a mistake in thinking that the brakes are there to slow you down when you're in an F1 car, when really it's there to control it. And I think that people really need to think about that when as it relates to AI agentic work. Think about guardrails up front. Think about what you want them to absolutely never do, and then set them loose.
Absolutely.
Right. And then you can
100%.
fly. Yeah.
You can fly.
That's awesome. Well, Bhaskar, thank you for coming on.
This was awesome.
Thank you, guys.
If our listeners, if anyone listening wants to follow you, wants to follow Bicycle, what are some of the best ways for them to do that?
It's mainly LinkedIn. And so that's pretty much it. Like, I think we have a Twitter account, etc. also, but like LinkedIn is where most of the activity is. And so that's, if anyone's obviously interested in a demo, then just, there's a link on the website to ask for a demo. And we'll actually have the product in self-serve mode there pretty soon. So excited about that.
That's exciting. Yeah, let us know when that's up, and we can definitely drop a link and push it out.
I'll be booking a demo right after this. I need it.
Yeah, I was gonna say. It sounds like you got one. That's a win.
And are you guys based in SF? Where are you guys based?
I'm in Boston.
You're
in Utah.
Other side.
So. You're okay. Got it. Cool. Awesome.
Kind of spread. But if I'm ever there, you're in SF, right, Bhaskar?
I'm in SF, but I'm on the East Coast a bunch, so I'll ping you next time I'm in Boston.
Yeah, if you're ever here, and if I'm ever out there, I'll definitely reach 100%. Out. That'd be fun.
100%.
Right. Well, you're part of the family, so we're excited to see where everything where it goes.
Yeah. Absolutely, man.
Thanks for joining, Bhaskar. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.